Hello, welcome back to my channel and another reaction video. This time we continue the Warhammer Fantasy Lore videos. This time we'll be checking out vampires.
The docklands of Altdorf might rightly be considered the heart of the Empire of Man. It is a teeming waterfront, and though it might be oft associated with the raucous poor, in truth, it is a mingling ground and point of embarkation, where citizens of every quarter and every birthright gather beneath the gloriously coloured sails of mighty ships. In neighbouring Bretonnia, the fortress capital of Cologne boasts the enormous Lion Ring, the finest jousting and tourney ground in the known world. 1,000 knights of the realm might ride abreast at its centre, their thundering charge lost in the roar of the surrounding crowd. In the far north, the city of Kislev boasts the Winter Gardens, where the sorcerous powers of the Tsarina have crafted fields of flowers that shine like diamonds, and entire forests of frosted glass. Great sculptures of exotic birds and legendary beasts shine beneath a perpetually midnight sky that glitters and glows with frozen stars. To stand in these places, or any of the other countless works of human greatness that span the great ocean to the world's edge mountains, is to be presented the boldest evidence of mankind's primacy over the old world. Goblins and beastmen might linger in the deepest woods. Orcs and trolls might wander mountain passes, but it is the nations of man alone that guide the destiny of the continent. And yet, an ancestral memory dwells in the soul of every man and woman, of a time before their great nations bestrode the old world. In this ancient era, humanity was nothing more than prey for the wild and hungry predators that stalked the lands. Primitive and hardly better than beasts themselves, mankind cowered behind the timber walls of feeble villages, powerless and alone. It has been over 2 millennia since these times, but the memory remains, and when the sun dips below the horizon and the world is cast in darkness, it stirs. Even in Altdorf, Cologne, or Kislev, it can be felt in the quickening of the heart when walking through a twisted alley. Or the sweats and chills that form when one strays too far from a crowd, or the trembling muscles and tingling of the spine that comes in the absence of the light. For no matter how far mankind has come, no matter how high their walls are raised or how bright their torches burn, the world that exists from dusk till dawn is not theirs to control. A great many predators stalk the lands of the old world, but the night is forever the domain of the vampire. First and foremost creatures of dark sorcery, vampires cannot be classified or categorized as natural beings might. No two are identical, and the variations amongst their kind range from the mild to the obscene. Yet they do share certain commonalities. All vampires were once mortal men or women, with hopes, dreams, and families of their own. But through a largely inexplicable and magical process, they are transformed into something neither living nor dead. All those who study the vampire struggle to make sense of this. Priests will claim that their souls are forbidden entry into the Garden of More and the afterlife, having been judged an abomination by the gods. Some wizards suggest they have moved between the realms, forever trapped between the mortal realm and the next. Whatever the truth, once the transformation has been completed, the vampire awakens as something new from the mortal that came before. The vampire possesses enormous power, swiftness, and vitality. Their strength vastly exceeds the strongest man, elf, dwarf, or greenskin, all of which might be tossed aside as easily as a newborn babe. Even champions of the dark gods, clad in ruinous armor, imbued with the favors of chaos, might be torn apart by the vampire with little effort. Their undead flesh, meanwhile, hardens into something resembling leather, yet far more resilient. Common blades and arrows shatter against them, gunfire, cannonballs, and rockets often ineffective. Their blood refuses to yield to any poison or disease, while the ravages and infirmities of time will never touch them. Their senses are likewise heightened. In the dark, they can see more clearly than any owl, and further than any hawk. Their sense of smell, and in particular their ability to detect fresh blood, is simply unparalleled. And at will, they can move too quickly for the eye to follow, outrunning most natural creatures. Other, more exotic powers can be found amongst the vampire, though they manifest irregularly. Many have been known to control the will of bats, wolves, or other wild creatures. Some can even metamorphosize into them.
The classic lore.
A few
basically.
can transform into an unnatural mist, swarms of flies, or become entirely ethereal. They can call forth darkened clouds and stormy weather, disperse the winds of magic, or even gaze into the future. Some are malformed and grotesque, writhing hosts to colonies of worms and insects, while others can transfix mortals with their transcendent beauty and alluring stare. The abilities of the vampire are seemingly without end, and there is no sure method of predetermining which dark gifts they possess. The transformation of the body is matched by a twisting of the mind. Though they retain the thoughts and memories of the mortal they once were, their thoughts become focused and cleansed. Doubt is replaced with certainty, weakness with resolution. Above any other creature, the vampire is the master of its own soul. This manifests itself as a great ambition. Mortals might dream of having the freedom to pursue their desires. Vampires possess this freedom, so their dreams become far greater than mortals could ever conceive. In one form or another, all have the desire to control and to rule. Vampirism, however, is ultimately a curse, and all vampires suffer from equally unusual vulnerabilities. The most common are an inability to cross running water, a weakness to certain herbs and metals, often garlic and silver.
Yep.
They might lack any reflection, or be burned by even the most timid rays of sunlight. Holy symbols, tomes, and blessings can likewise be anathema to the vampire, along with certain dwarven runes and elven alloys.
Okay.
Madness too runs in their veins, especially in older vampires, whose lifespans have become too long for their minds to comprehend. Yet, the ultimate mark for the vampire, and their greatest weakness, is their unquenchable need for blood. It replaces the demands for sleep, food, drink, warmth, or even air, but is unlike any mortal need. The red thirst is entirely overwhelming, a constant awareness and desire that might wax and wane, but is always present. A vampire will always be aware of blood around them. In a crowded room, heartbeats become deafening, while even the smallest wound billows an aroma that tests and challenges the will. A recently turned vampire will have the greatest difficulty in managing this addiction, but with time will arise the willpower to control it. Some
Really throwing all the
need
classic
only feed a few times a year,
hits and
while the oldest of their race can go centuries
and
without
whatever.
blood. But the thirst will always arise, and must always be sated. Those who try to resist often go mad, devolving into a frenzy of killing and devouring. In such an unnatural species, however, there are always exceptions. Some have found a way to placate their need for blood with warpstone or dark magic, or attempted to feed solely on animals, vermin, or the recently dead. These latter measures cannot always satisfy a vampire, however, for nothing can replicate the intoxicating qualities of fresh blood. Only a few have overcome the thirst entirely. Most famously, and first amongst his kind to do so, was Aborash, who was freed from his torment with the
Aborash,
blood
that's
of
the
a vanquished
first
dragon.
they've actually named, I think.
While a great diversity exists across vampires, all have been created in the same way, through a ritual known as the Blood Kiss. Though its name appeals to romantics, both mortal and immortal, it is ultimately a predatory act. Yet it is also considered an intimate gift, representing great affection and respect on the part of the benefactor. During the Blood Kiss, Both parties drink deeply of one another, with throats torn open, and gushes of blood flowing down welcome throats. It is said that every vampire that has spoken of it describes it differently, and the feeling of the transformation must ultimately remain unknown, outside those who have experienced it. As the blood kiss was passed down throughout the generations of vampires, bloodlines developed that separated and defined the species. 5 such families are believed to exist across the vampires, though others may remain undiscovered. The first and most infamous are the von Carsteins, for none have contributed so boldly and so
they mentioned
to the history of their race.
One of the other videos.
Each bloodline and every vampire is consumed by a desire for power, and for the von Carsteins, this has expressed itself as a great appetite for land, subjects, and the trappings of nobility. Sylvania, a former province of the Empire, is most associated with the von Carsteins, as successive vampiric rulers presided over the territory for centuries,
I need
before
that
wars
picture
with the
on
other
my
elector
wall.
counts
That's
brought them to ruin.
too damn epic.
The Necrarch bloodline, by contrast, is largely isolationist, obsessive in their introspection and pursuit of knowledge. Many have come to regard living beings as a flawed creation, and see the undead as a fitting replacement. They work endlessly in lone towers and fortresses, experimenting with the powers of magic and necromancy, but also delving deep into the natural philosophies and forces of the material world. Their studies have given them an unparalleled understanding of their own kind, but it has come at a price. Necrarchs have abandoned their humanity entirely, and their sustained exposure to unnatural elements has twisted their appearance beyond recognition. Compared to the Necrarchs, the Order of the Blood Dragons represents an antithetical approach to immortality. Vampires of this bloodline dedicate themselves to mastering every form of close-quarters martial combat, and in doing so, have become the most fearsome warriors in the known world. They care little for the study of magic or for conquests and power, and seek only to test their blades against worthy foes. Many have adopted a dark parody of the codes of honor and chivalry displayed by mortal knightly orders, though the manifestation of this varies from individual to individual. It is in the Strigoi bloodline that the curse of vampirism is most apparent. While the other bloodlines can, when necessary, blend seamlessly into mortal society, the Strigoi have become something closer to beast than men. They have lost themselves to the predator that lies within, and embraced it fully. Many have lost their sanity and become solitary parasites, stalking the hidden places of the world and lamenting their lost glories. Every manner of scavenger is drawn to their presence, and they are known throughout the world as Ghoul Kings. The last of the known bloodlines are the Lamians. While they are said to lack the raw, brute strength of other bloodlines, none have achieved greater power. They possess, even amongst their kind, extraordinary cunning, deviousness, and political acumen. Invisibly, they manipulate the strings of mortal affairs, secretly exerting unspeakable control over entire realms. Their plans are often beyond the ability of short-lived mortals to understand or recognize, and might take many human lifetimes to come to fruition. But they are always at work, and often hide in plain sight. Perhaps the Lamian bloodline's greatest triumph, however, was in obfuscating the nature of the vampires themselves across mortal nations. Many myths and fables purport to explain the origins of these creatures, from improper burials to loving those beneath one's station, but these, more than anything, merely illustrate the common folk's misunderstanding of vampirism. The true origin of the vampires can instead be found to the far south, a region of the world once known as Nehakara, and now feared as the land of the dead.
Ancient Egypt. Good scene.
Infamous is the story of Nagash, the first and greatest of the necromancers, who achieved immortality and came perilously close to ascending to godhood. Lesser known, however, are the histories of those who attempted to replicate his work. In the city of Lamia, Nagash's plundered texts and repositories of forbidden lore were closely studied by Queen Neferata and a small cabal of her followers. Though they failed to reproduce the triumphs of Nagash exactly, they did achieve immortality, albeit in a more twisted and accursed form. Through an unholy elixir of sorcerous power, Neferata bestowed this gift upon 12 of her closest confidants and retainers. Each of those who drank of it exhibited distinctive powers and abilities. They became the first of the vampires, and the progenitors of the bloodlines that would follow. The myriad of wars between the living and the dead that engulf Nehekhara would see the kingdom of Lamia destroyed, and the forbidden knowledge used to create the vampires lost alongside it. The first vampires and those to whom they had given the blood kiss were forced to flee their homeland, becoming scattered across the world in the millennia that followed. Yet, wherever they took root, vampirism and necromancy flourished. Ultimately, however, the vampires would always be undone by their own relentless ambitions, defeated by the same selfish motivations of mortals to which they deemed themselves superior. Officially, the vampires are a race of creatures on the verge of extinction. It has been centuries since the last of the von Carsteins led the armies of Sylvania against the Empire, while the Blood Keep has long since been demolished and its vampiric knights destroyed. The Lamians have been lost to history, and the Strigoi and Necrarchs have been reduced to but a scattered few pathetic individuals. The rulers of mankind assure themselves and their subjects that this dwindling race, if it still exists, will never replicate the triumphs of their forebears. And yet, every now and then, when the dread moon Morsleep is full, a witch hunter patrolling the winding roads of Sylvania will disappear without a trace, and local peasants will describe the sighting of a black coach bearing a courtly noble who grinned at them with a fanged smile. Travelers taking the mountain passes between the Empire and Bretonnia speak of mysterious knights guarding bridges and fords, their armor decorated with scenes of carnage, seemingly awaiting a worthy challenger. In forgotten cemeteries and unguarded tombs, shadows move in the darkness, and by morning, each grave bears the telltale signs of excavation. In the borderlands between kingdoms, lonely towers and fortresses are said to glow with eerie green fire, while the skies above shine with the manifestations of sorcery. And in the highest courts of every human kingdom, rumors will sometimes swirl of noble women who are rarely seen in the light of day, only for those who speak such things to suddenly vanish from their stations. And each night, when the last sliver of the blazing sun lowers itself beneath the horizon, every man, woman, and child can feel an ancient terror stirring in the back of their minds. A memory of a time when they were nothing but cattle, and a terrible fear that such an era might yet come again, an endless night upon which the sun will never rise.
That is a cool shot. Well, there you have it, folks. Warhammer Fantasy Vampires. And yeah, this was once again a very informative video, and yeah, I do love all things vampires, and it put a smile on my face to hear all the classic lore stuff that these vampires possess. And yeah, it was interesting and they're explaining that okay, once the vampires were rulers of the night, but yeah, these days they're just, you know, a myth, a legend that snatch up people every now and then. But yeah, I remember the first game trailer for Warhammer where they introduced the vampires. I think the story in that went exactly as they describe at the end, that the Endless Night is indeed attempting to rise again. They've been harvesting people for an army and whatever. Yeah, as always, the fan art they use on these videos is spectacular. There are a few so epic that I really need them. Need them on my wall, especially this one. I love the difference in these vampire clans, but yeah, my favorite is the one Karstein's. But anyway, what do you guys think? Write your thoughts down below. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Comment, like, subscribe if you want, and I will see you in another video.